everybody, welcome to the Yoga Corner. My name is Shelby Phoenix and I'm a yoga teacher and mindset coach, as well as the owner of the Yoga Corner and founder of the Yoga Middle School. I help yoga teachers overcome fear and self-doubt by discovering what really matters so that they can confidently kickstart their yoga career. Because everyone deserves to change their lives and make an impact on the world around them by discovering their purpose and potential. This is the 9th episode in my series called Yoga Corner Chats, where I interview women in wellness. And today we're going to be joined by Christina Ennabe. Christina is a licensed therapist, life coach, and co-host of the Mental Health Matters podcast. She specializes in working with type A high achievers struggling with major life transitions and change due to analysis, paralysis, perfectionism, and anxiety. So I'm going to invite Christina into this live here so that we can chat. So today we're going to be talking about anxiety, fear of failure, and perfectionism. And I know that that is something that affects my clients a lot. So I'm so excited to talk about this today. Hi, Christina.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course, I'm excited. I'm just trying to get my little tripod thingy set up. There we go.
I was wondering if it's okay with you. I like to start these interviews by taking a couple of deep breaths together.
Yes, please.
Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
That helps me with my anxiety. So
yeah, I think that's a great idea.
all right. And anyone who's listening now or later, I invite you to join us as well. All right, Christina, settle into your chair. Straighten up your spine and let your shoulders relax down your back. Begin to take a long, deep, slow inhale through your nose, filling up all the way down to your toes. And exhaling out. Another full, deep breath in. And release. One last breath together. Fill up. And empty. And if your eyes are closed, flutter them open.
Love that. Thank you. I needed
you're
that.
Welcome. So if I wanted to start by just asking you to introduce yourself and your business and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a licensed therapist and a coach, and I work primarily online with clients, and I specialize in anxiety, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, all that fun stuff that comes along with anxiety. So my clients are very type A. They like structure, they like organization, but a lot of the themes that fuel a type A personality often come with a lot of problematic behaviors, like what we're going to be talking about today. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background. And I'm in New Hampshire. I'm located on the seacoast, which I just moved here a few months ago, and I love it. So it's been great.
I feel like my clients also, like, there's this theme of like anxiety, like perfectionism, like never feeling like confident or ready to like get started on something. So like starting with anxiety and perfectionism and all those kind of behaviors that you talked about, how are these things connected?
Oh my gosh, in so many ways. I mean, let's figure out, like, when we're talking about like perfectionism, for example, what is it that's fueling that drive to be perfect? What is it that is fueling the hyper focus around making sure that everything is exact and meeting these certain standards? 9 times out of 10, it's fear of not being enough, fear of failure, fear of messing up, or fear of judgment.
Yeah.
Fear of rejection, it's fear, which is anxiety, right? I
Yeah.
mean, anxiety is this constant, pervasive worry, worrying about what ifs and the unknown and feeling out of control. So it
Mm.
all goes hand in hand.
Like let's even take like one step back. What is anxiety and like how is it different than everyday stress?
Well, I love that question because I do think that anxiety gets thrown around a lot as like a buzzword. So
Yeah.
I think it is helpful to distinguish the difference. I think we all know the feeling of stress. I think
Yeah.
everybody experiences stress. The idea is like if we take away those specific stressors or those triggers, then the symptoms should subside, right?
Right.
The overwhelm, the maybe like the irritability, difficulty sleeping, energy problems, right? Like all of those things should essentially dissipate when
Yeah.
the stressor or the problem has been resolved. But with anxiety, it's not the case. Anxiety is chronic and persistent and pervasive. So even though there might not be any true threat, there's
Right.
always a perception of threat. So there's always something that you could be worrying about or thinking about. And obviously, there's a lot of like subcategories of anxiety and anxiety disorders. But if we're just talking about like generalized anxiety,
Right.
that's very common. And so it's like, even when you take away those things, the anxiety and those feelings are still there.
Mm. And so before like you talked about fear, like fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, imposter
Mhm.
syndrome, like all those
Mhm.
fears. So when you're having anxiety as opposed to stress, are those fears the kind of threats that your mind and body are responding to?
Many times, yeah, yeah. It's those common themes and those common themes with my clients. It's a lot of that fear of how am I going to be perceived? How are people
Mm,
going to respond to me? What are people going to think about me? It's this, not wanting to put yourself out there to possibly face rejection,
right.
or attaching senses of self to output, to accomplishments, to
Mm,
productivity. So if I'm striving for my work to be perfect, that means people are going to think I'm perfect and I've got my shit together.
right.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that anxiety is a lot of that sense of self is attached to output
Right.
and work. And so if work fails or if these goals aren't accomplished, there's a feeling of I'm not enough. Right?
Right.
I need to be better. I need to be better. I need to be better. And it's funny because a lot of times there aren't any clear cut goals as far as what does better even look like.
Right.
So a lot of times people are striving for these arbitrary ideas of perfection that aren't
Yeah.
even real or clear. And so they're just, it's like a hamster wheel effect
Right.
sometimes.
You're like never climbing to the top. There is no
Yeah,
top.
there's no top. Exactly.
Um, I know in my personal experience, I have been diagnosed with several anxiety disorders, and I started noticing them when I was, or I started, I guess my parents started noticing it when I was in middle school and high school because they started making me go to therapy, and
Mm.
I didn't understand. I think I thought that's just what everyone felt like.
Oh, yeah.
And when the therapist explained it to me that that's not like everyone's experience, it surprised me a lot.
Mm.
So I'm wondering how might someone know when it's time to seek therapy or other treatment?
Well, first off, like I want to say that that's actually pretty awesome that your family encouraged you to get
Yes.
help at such a young age because I had the opposite issue
Yeah.
where I mean, I think I first actually experienced depression and then anxiety came on later in life, but I didn't know that there was such thing as getting support and help for it.
Right.
So it took me until like adulthood to realize that I could and that it was acceptable and okay to get help.
Right.
So that's awesome that you actually got that in your youth. But to answer your question, so for anxiety specifically to be a diagnosable disorder or like mental illness is that it impacts your functioning.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it getting in the way of your ability to have healthy relationships? Is your work impacted? Is your school life impacted? Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Um, what are your moods like during the day? Are you able to get things done? Do you procrastinate? Do you um, stay in bed most days? Just
Right.
like normal functioning gets impacted. And so if you're starting to notice that your anxiety and your fear is getting in the way of you just living your life, then it's probably time to seek support.
Yeah.
And I always recommend that people start with therapy versus just starting with medication alone.
Yeah.
Or if you're going to try medication, also be working with a therapist. I don't
Yeah.
always advise just medication like alone, unless maybe you have had a history of being in and out of therapy.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think it's helpful to address mood disorders internally and externally, and it's something I talk about a lot. Is working with the biology and then working with the external factors.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you maybe explain that a little bit more
Yeah.
when you said external and internal factors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we we all have biological vulnerabilities to certain things. So if I always use the example of like if you had a family history of diabetes, your biology is more susceptible to diabetes. You can
Right.
combat that with diet and exercise. Sometimes you still might get diabetes, right? Just
Right.
because of your biology. So people who have anxiety, depression, psychosis, personality disorders, like all of these things, they have some biological vulnerability to mental illness.
Mm,
It's common that if you have a family history of anxiety and depression, you more likely can
yeah.
get anxiety and depression. But let's say all of that is at bay, but then you add stress, you
Right.
add life events, your first child, moving to a new city, starting a new school, um, job stress. Like you add in all of these elements, and there you have a recipe for for
Right.
disaster, right? For anxiety, in that you've got the external factors and the internal factors coming together, and now you have these problems. And
Right.
so I think it's so important for people to examine their health holistically,
Yeah.
um, because we are whole people.
Right.
So if we're talking about brain health, we're also talking about physical health, right? It's all
Yes.
connected. And so addressing our health from the internal and the external. Internal, how's your sleep? How's your nutrition? Um, how's your exercise? How is your overall stress management? Are you using substances? Are you taking medication? All of
Right.
those things. And then how are you addressing it externally? What are you doing for time management? What are you doing for your relationships? What are you doing for your work? Um, you know, there's a lot of different things that people can try, but I think
Right.
addressing it from both sides is really effective.
Yes. When we were talking earlier and I shared about how I was able to get help and treatment at a young age,
Mm-hmm.
and in contrast, you didn't even know that was accessible or acceptable until
Mm-hmm.
adulthood. And even though it's 2022, there's still this huge stigma around
Mm-hmm.
mental health.
Yeah.
Um, and I know I've experienced it like at the workplace, like
Mm-hmm.
having a time where I might have been in a mental health crisis, but not feeling like I was entitled to take a day off, even though I
Yeah.
was sick, or
Yeah.
feeling ashamed of your disorder or how you're feeling, or going to seek help. So,
Mm-hmm.
how, why do you think it's so important to advocate for mental health and try to, how can we try to change that stigma?
I think more people being open and vulnerable and sharing their experiences with mental health, even if you don't have a diagnosable mental illness,
Right.
right? I think even just talking about everyday stressors and how like everybody experiences hardships and mental health problems, I think
Yeah.
having ongoing conversations will help other people to feel that it is okay and it's safe to
Yeah.
share. But I can totally understand how people would be scared to be open about that, especially if maybe they have faced rejection in the past or were told not to feel the way that they feel or were
Right.
punished for feeling the way that they feel.
Right.
Um, like it's so frustrating when I do work with teenagers or kids who clearly have anxiety and depression, but their
Yeah.
parents are saying no, they're
Yeah.
just moody or
Right.
they're just a teenager. This is, you know, they don't need medication. They don't need this, right? But they
Right.
want us to fix their kids' problems when like we're helping them find solutions, but met with a lot of resistance. And so
Right.
education, validation, support, you know, all of those things are really important. I do see a shift, and maybe social media has been a great way for people to speak more openly about mental health. I do
Yeah.
think it has become more acceptable, um, more sought out as
Yeah.
like something that's normal. And it also depends on like where you're located and your
Right.
community and culture too. Like there's so many
Yeah.
different factors involved. Um, I do find that like older generations are more resistant because they were brought up that you don't talk about these things. Whereas
Right.
now, like younger generations, like they're talking about mental health in school, which is amazing.
Right.
And there's so many different resources now available to people. So I think the conversation is getting better. I just think it is an ongoing dialogue for sure.
Yes. I've noticed, well, on TikTok, right? There's so many and
Yeah.
people sharing about their stories
Mm-hmm.
and like just their personal experiences and
Mm-hmm.
different symptoms they experience. And hearing those stories is so validating,
Yeah.
especially if you feel like you've been kind of struggling alone. And
Yeah.
speaking of social media, as a therapist, you're showing your face and like being very open on social
Mm-hmm.
media. And I know that's not always the case. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it is something that I'm still personally battling sometimes of how much do I share of myself? Where's that line of self disclosure? Because
Right,
as therapists in school, we're taught do not self disclose, do not talk about yourself, do not have social media. There's so many
right,
clear cut lines that you do not cross. And a lot of that is for ethical reasons, liability reasons. Like they're there for a reason, but I also think a lot of that mentality is very old school because we do have
right,
social media now and people do seek out working with people because of their personality, because they feel a
right,
connection, because they vibe with their style, right?
right,
Which is awesome to know that you are choosing a therapist that you believe is the right fit for you. You're not just
right,
defaulting because that's just like what your insurance will cover kind of thing.
right,
So I definitely think it's what I share and how I choose to show up on social media always is coming from a genuine, authentic place, and that I want to provide value and support.
right,
And I think by being vulnerable about my history and my
Yeah.
experience with therapy, anxiety, depression, medication. I think it helps. I think it helps people to understand that therapists go to therapy.
Right.
Therapists are just human beings that have
Right.
problems just like everybody else. And if we're walking the talk, walking the walk, talking the talk,
Right.
um, then people know that it's not just bullshit. You know, we're
Right.
not just preaching these things and we don't believe in them, or we're not just preaching these things and they don't actually help people. Like
Right.
therapists, we're not just here to listen to people vent. We're here
Right.
to provide evidence, like scientific evidence supported uh, treatment and
Right.
techniques and tools. So I think it's so important for clients or potential clients or just people public in the public to see that this stuff works if you work on it and if you
Right.
give it time and if you put these things into practice. But everybody's journey and everybody's experience is different. So but I have had clients ask me personally like how I've dealt with things or how I what's my experience been like with medication. And I think it does help because this is, you know, you build relationships with people too, and
Right.
they feel like they can trust you, and you're not going to lead them astray, kind of thing, or give them like wrong information.
Right. Yeah. Building that trust and building
Yeah.
that relationship is so, so important. I think when you're going through therapy, like having that
Yeah.
person that you can really connect with.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously the past few years have been collectively very stressful with the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic and lots of other things going on. And I've noticed on the news and everything, the, that anxiety is going up in
Mm-hmm.
general in the world. And I'm wondering if you've noticed that in your clients and talking with people.
Yeah, it's like 100%. Obviously, we're going through a um, worldwide pandemic, and I remember when this first started, 2020, March, February of 2020,
Mm,
and I was working as a therapist. It was so effing hard. It was so
yeah,
effing hard because I couldn't separate my problems from my clients' problems. Like normally we're,
mm,
you know, therapists are good about boundaries and can compartmentalize, but this was something that everybody in the whole entire world was
right.
experiencing. And I was like, holy shit, like
Yeah,
I don't know how to handle this.
right.
So yeah, it has definitely stirred up a lot of anxiety. Interestingly enough, social anxiety, especially for kids, because
Mm,
maybe they started middle school or started high school or started college and they
right.
were alone and isolated for like a year before they
Yeah,
could have that social interaction. So in those stages of development, it was disrupted almost for a lot of
right.
kids. So a lot of kids experience pandemic and COVID anxiety for sure. Um, and it's not just a perceived threat. It's a real threat.
Right.
COVID was a real threat.
Right.
So, yeah, I definitely saw a lot more of that. However, not silver lining, but a good thing to come out of all of this was that telehealth became more accessible. We were able to
Yes.
cross state lines with clients. We were able to provide more support than we ever really had before.
Yeah.
And now telehealth is a normal practice that more people are doing. And like for me, it allows me to reach the entire state versus
Right.
just a small area. So in that sense, mental health mental health treatment and therapy, I believe, became more accessible and more reachable for people. And I do think that a lot more people were looking for help during the last couple of years. So that maybe they
Yeah.
wouldn't have sought out before.
Yeah. I can relate a little bit to what you were saying because when the pandemic started, I was a middle school and high school teacher.
Oh
And
my gosh.
so when the rug got pulled out from under us, like I was freaking the fuck out. Like I was very
Oh my
stressed, very
God.
anxious, and then I
Yeah.
could see the kids like crash and burn, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can lead these kids because I'm struggling to keep my head
Yeah.
above water.
Hmm.
Um, and it was really hard to watch all of them struggle
Hmm.
so much. And that's why I am really passionate about teaching kids yoga because I feel like that age group sometimes gets like forgotten about, like you said, like, oh, they're just
Yeah.
kids, like they'll get over it, blah blah blah,
No.
it's their hormones.
I mean, kids are so freaking resilient. It's
Yeah.
amazing. They're so amazing. However, it is so important to validate kids' mental health because so often they are not seen and they are not heard, or they're
Yes.
just dismissed.
Yeah.
So, your work is so incredibly important because you are combining the internal with the external when you're working with your clients. You are
Right.
talking about mental health and you're working on calming the body and working on stress. And
Yeah.
so your work is so important. And the fact that you
Thank
do
you.
work with kids and teens, um, which is such, I mean, you got to be a special person to be able to work with kids and teens. I have a few kids and teens myself, but it's definitely not an area that I'm 100% comfortable with, and I'm completely honest about that. So I think what you do is amazing, and I'm a huge advocate for yoga, especially for anxiety.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for me, like when I first started my incorporating yoga like into my lifestyle very regularly, I was probably at the worst my anxiety has ever been. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was physically very ill from it and also like mentally wasn't doing well, internal and external.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what I learned very quickly was the connection between my mind and my body,
Yeah.
how the anxiety was affecting my physical health and how that was affecting my mental health. And then it's a
Mm-hmm.
kind of a spiral.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's talked about
Mm-hmm.
enough. What do
Yeah,
you think is important to know about that?
I think often people are so good at suppressing feelings, ignoring feelings, distracting
Mm,
from feelings. And so it's difficult when you start working with somebody who doesn't know how to express their feelings effectively or in a healthy way. However, people are pretty tuned in to, like, I have headaches. I'm
yes,
not sleeping. I'm nauseous all the time. I have irritable bowel syndrome. I
right.
have gut problems. Like, I'm so tired all the time. People are pretty tuned in to the physical stuff, but I don't think
Yeah,
people always acknowledge where that's coming from. They go
right,
on a diet. They
right.
work with a nutritionist. They work with a medical professional, and then come to find out, oh, it's anxiety. It's
Yeah,
in it's your mental health that's affecting all
yeah,
these different parts of you. So working with somebody to be able to process your emotions, communicate effectively, feel your feelings in a safe way, without judgment, all of that can help to regulate what's going on in your body.
yeah,
But it is so important for that mind body connection. It's all connected. And I
yeah,
say all the time, like, when you feel good physically, you feel good mentally, and vice versa.
right.
So I'm a huge advocate for exercise, nutrition. Like I said, I talk about all of that holistic stuff
Yeah.
a lot because it's important.
Um, yeah, it is important, right? And when I was really sick, I was having all those symptoms. Like I was having tummy problems. I was nauseous
Mhm.
all the time. I got migraines. Like I lost a lot of weight, and I would
Mhm.
go to the doctor, and would like demand, like, I want a test. I got a colonoscopy. I had all these
Oh my
tests done.
God.
And like every time the doctor would, over and over say, this is like anxiety. You should be like treating this as a mental health issue. And I would get angry. I would
Oh,
be like, no, it's
yeah.
physical. And after I realized it's all connected, it was a game changer in the way that I
Mhm.
just like treated my body and myself.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, excuse me. I got a fuzzy on my lip. But I think that maybe came back to that stigma piece of like people don't want to acknowledge that they do have anxiety or
right.
some kind of mental health thing going on, and I think that is part of that stigma. So that's awesome that your doctor even brought that up
Yeah.
because I do think that is more now the conversation. But yeah, a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that maybe there's some mental health stuff going on too that's contributing
Yeah.
to physical health.
Um, I forgot what I was just gonna say. Um, oh yeah. So tying back into like perfectionism and fear of failure, I've
Mm-hmm.
heard the term high functioning anxiety a
Yeah.
lot. I
Yep.
think that's connected to that idea of perfectionism and being type A.
Yep.
Is that a real thing, and what and what does it mean?
So yeah. So I think when we use the term high functioning, what we're talking about is we're talking about being able to, on the outside, you look like you have your shit together. You maybe you do identify as a perfectionist. You are a high achiever. You are able to get things done, and maybe on the outside, people wouldn't even know that you struggle with
Right,
anxiety. Whereas maybe low functioning anxiety or low functioning person with anxiety, they're not getting out of bed, they're not able to work, they don't have um, strong relationships, like they need maybe a higher level of care.
right,
Whereas these people that we see on social media or maybe in your personal life as like, wow, they're I don't know how they do it, they're just go go
right,
go, they get so much done. They might have intense anxiety. They might have intense fear that if they don't produce and if they don't do all the things, then
right.
they're going to be a failure. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's that fear that's really driving a lot of that overproduction and overwork. And then eventually, like, it's not sustainable. So people often crash and burn
Yes,
and experience burnout. Or they might notice that the things that used to be motivating and fulfilling are not anymore. Maybe people feel really numb to the things
right.
that they used to enjoy and love. Um, Entrepreneurs, especially, like you fall out of
Mm-hmm.
love with your business.
Right,
You start procrastinating on things. You don't get back to people. You start letting things slip through the cracks, right? Because that perfectionism is not sustainable.
right.
So when we're talking about high functioning, I think we're just talking about those people who on the outside seemingly have it all together, but inside they're just like a ticking time bomb.
Mm. Yeah, it's like putting on your mask.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know, I mean, I've been guilty of that too. I'm very type A, and I used to hold myself to a high unrealistic standard that, you know, nothing was ever satisfying, nothing was ever good enough. And that, I think that fear, that anxiety contributed to depression, and it all like,
Yeah.
muddled together. And so really working on, when I work with people who have perfectionism, it's a lot of mindset shifts. It's a lot of
Yeah.
challenging and changing thinking. It's a lot
Yeah.
of deconditioned, behavior and beliefs. Um, I've worked with a lot of athletes. I used to be an athlete, and that
Mm,
perfectionism is
that
very
makes a lot of sense.
deep
Yeah.
rooted in athletes. And it's conflicting messages, which is really tough because on the one hand, people are telling you you have to be perfect, and on the other hand, perfectionism isn't real. Like to be, so it's
Hold
like,
on 1 second, Dad. Sorry.
no, that's okay. So it's just
All
like
right.
it's so tough for people to know what to do with
Right.
that. And in our society, I think perfectionism is glorified
Mm,
as like people should be striving for perfection. People should
right.
be perfect. And I think that has been the downfall of social media is it's so easy to compare ourselves to every other
Right.
person who we see as having it all together. When in reality, we don't know their story. We don't know what's
Right.
really going on.
Right.
I saw this so much in the fitness world of so much disordered eating, so much self loathing, self harm.
Mm, right.
And on the outside, people are like, I want to be like that. I want to look like that. They're amazing. Like they have it all together. When in
Right.
reality, like they were the most self destructive, like sad people. So
Right.
it's tough.
Um, if you could give maybe one example of like a perfectionist thought or an anxious thought and a way to rewrite that
Yeah. So a lot
into
of
something that's more
the
productive.
yeah, the type of therapy I do is cognitive behavior therapy, which is a lot of that. It's the challenging, the thinking, and the reframing. So coming up with either a positive, more positive way of looking at it, or a more realistic, accurate way of looking at it. So,
Right.
like a perfectionist thought might be, well, if I'm not going to be great at this thing, then I'm not even going to try. So it's like self sabotage in a way of like, if I know I'm not going to do this well, I'm not going to do it at all.
Right.
And so, what I would do with clients who might have that kind of thought or that kind of behavior is to, one, be aware of how that thought is affecting their behaviors ineffectively. So, it's interesting that perfectionists actually tend to get a lot less done than non perfectionists. Perfectionists are not actually as productive as they might think that they are because they get stuck on things or they don't complete things or they don't even try to do things. It's that all or nothing thinking. So, what we want to do is try to challenge that thought,
Yeah.
notice where it's
Totally.
actually not helping, and how do we come up with a more accurate thought? Like perhaps a reframe could be, I know this isn't perfect and at the standard that I would like, and I'm going to do it anyway. Oh, there you are, Shelby. I lost you for a second. Did you catch that, what I said?
Yes. I noticed that in my students. So when I was a teacher, I was an art teacher, and even kids as young as sixth grade, you could give them all the art materials in the world and examples and how-tos and or just, whatever. And they're terrified that if they draw on the paper, it's not
Mm,
I suck at art. So I'm not going to even try because I don't I don't want other people to think I'm bad or it's going to be bad.
exactly.
It's not going to be Mona Lisa, so what's the point?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so recognizing that that's actually holding you back, it's preventing you from accomplishing things, which if that's your ultimate goal to accomplish things, then you're
Right.
actually just self-sabotaging
Right.
because of this idea of perfectionism. So I often tell clients the goal is to not be perfect at it. The goal is to make mistakes. The more mistakes that you make, the less of this need to be perfect you'll have. So like if there's a project that you're working on and you think it sucks, do it anyway. Like send it out into the world before you're ready and see what happens. More often than not, nobody's even going to notice the things that you're hyper focusing on. So just do it anyway and see what happens. And action is so important when it comes to therapy. At least the work that I do with clients is like, we're not just talking about things, we're also doing things. So yeah, it's about challenging that thinking.
Yeah, I love that. Make as many mistakes as possible. Like that's the goal.
That's the point. Yeah. Is that it's gonna be bad. Like it's gonna seem bad to you and it's gonna seem cringy. Like I do it all the time. If you follow me on Instagram and you see like my reels and stuff, like I've made grammatical spelling errors, like things haven't been synced up. I'll maybe get like 2 likes on something that I spent so much time on, and it's just like whatever. Like I'm still showing up and providing consistency, and that helps me more than anything. You know, so I do it too.
And also, I think 2 things. One, when you get to make a mistake and realize like you're not going to die or like, you know, the whole world isn't going to hate you or like all these terrible things aren't going to happen. I think it builds like a resilience almost. Like the next time it gets a little easier or maybe a little less scary or you have more of an idea of what to expect. And also, if you're striving for this perfection, right, and you're putting out what's perfect, you're not relatable. Like other people see the mistakes or maybe they don't, but when you take yourself down a level, it's like, oh, I want to work with that person because they made a silly spelling error or like that video was funny and like I can relate to them.
Yeah, nobody's perfect, and to preach perfectionism is not realistic, and it is tough when you have those other voices from people that expect and demand things of you, like in the workplace, for example, or like in sports. So yeah, so it is a lot of going against what feels comfortable. Perfectionism might feel comfortable, and it might feel like a safe space for a lot of people because they're anticipating that they will know what the outcomes are if they can control every step along the way. And honestly, like we're shattering that idea because we have zero control over outcomes. And I say this all the time, even if we do all the right things, shit could still hit the fan. Like, let's use COVID as a perfect example.
That's what I was exactly going to say.
Yeah. Oh my God. So building resiliency. When you know that you can come on the other side, surviving, being okay, like all of those worst case scenarios didn't actually happen, you do become more resilient and confident.
To wrap up this interview, I wanted you to just share where people can find you and what you're offering right now. And also maybe just speak a little bit about your podcast.
Oh yeah, I always forget about it. It's terrible. Terrible marketing. Yes, so you can connect with me on Instagram at Christina Counsels. That's where I share all of my updated information. I'm working on a program around fear of failure, geared toward entrepreneurs. So if you're interested in that topic, definitely want to connect with me on Instagram because that's where I'll be sharing when that's going to be launching and available to people. And yeah, so I am currently accepting clients. I have a very limited availability at the moment, but I do have room for a few clients. So if you're located in New Hampshire, or I actually can provide telehealth to Floridians as well. So if you're in New Hampshire or Florida, I can work with you as a client. So you can always reach me on here or my website. And then my podcast, yeah. So Mental Health Matters podcast is a podcast I co-host with a friend and fellow clinician, and we talk about all things mental health and wellness. And it's really a platform for us to continue working on that destigmatizing of mental health, talking about relatable real life experiences that we all go through, while also providing some psychoeducation around it and some resources and support. So my partner Hillary and I sometimes will have guests on who are subject matter experts. And so, yeah, we have a Instagram, Hillary and Christina, for that as well. So you can connect with us there too. Because we always want to know what you guys, what our listeners want to hear and know about. So, yeah, that's that.
I've been listening to your podcast when I've been driving around, and it's really, really good. So I think everyone should go check that out. I've been listening to it, I think, on just Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, it's Apple, Spotify.
Oh, it's on Spotify too. Cool.
Yeah. Oh
and
my
I
gosh,
will tag all of that in my little post when I post this.
Yeah, and if you're ever interested, we're always looking for guests. So if you're interested, especially, we really want to connect with local guests because we are in New England and they are such small communities. We want to make sure that people who like need resources have access to those resources and know where to find people. So yeah, if you're interested in coming on, we can talk about that.
All right, we'll definitely connect about that.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Christina. I want to express my gratitude for you for coming on the Yoga Corner chats, and also for just being a mental health advocate, and for sharing so much valuable information. Thank you.
Thank you for having me and for letting me talk to your people. And like I said, I'm a huge supporter of what you do. So I'm very happy to have found you and connect with you. So,
all right, Christina, and everyone else, have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll chat soon, Christina.
Bye.
Bye. I have a talk show on the internet.